wat saam met ons gesels oor die week se nuusgebeure. Maak jou gerus tuis.
Well, thank you for joining us this week for our special wrap of the news bulletin.
Dit was 'n baie bedrywige nuusweek. Wat het jy alles vir ons oor die uitgawe?
Well, Unita, it has been indeed a bumper week with regards to news. Now, we'll be looking at the trouble that the Rustenburg local municipality has found itself in, some of the crime stories that made the newspaper, how the city has honored a hero, as well as community happenings in terms of entertainment news and sports accomplishments.
Dit is omtrent 'n mond vol. Kom ons begin met wat gebeur het by die munisipaliteit. Ek is gister daar verby en daar was 'n hele paar polisievoertuie.
Well, it was the Hawks, Unita. Yesterday they were at the Rustenburg local municipality. With the information that we received is that they are investigating a case of fraud with regards to tenders worth 85 million rands. Now the full story is on page 3 of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald.
Jy het genoem dat die stad 'n held vereer het.
Yes, a year ago, Unita, a man rushed to the aid of a father and his son who were being hijacked. Now, this young man paid ultimate price for his bravery because he was fatally shot. This week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald on page 3, there's a story about this man who has been honored here in Rustenburg. So if our readers would like to see more details on how this man was honored, they can just go to page 3 of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald.
Verlede week was daar 'n storie van die man wat met 'n kruis loop wat 'n gastehuis bedrieg het. Maar die man is ook boonop nie die werklike kruisstapper nie.
Okay, we were lucky to get hold of the real man who is working with a real cross. He has been suffering abuse from various people who mistake him as being fraudulent. Now, read our story on page 6 of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald to hear more about Patrick Styles. That's his name.
Ek sien daar is 'n storie op bladsy 5 oor 'n hele trok met gesteelde kruideniersware wat deur die polisie gevind is.
Well, after receiving a tip-off, the police arrested a truck driver, or actually 2 truck drivers, and they also arrested 2 shop owners for the illegal possession of goods. Not going to go into more detail on that. If you would like to know more, go on page 5 of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald.
Bladsy 8 is propvol welwillendheid. Waaroor gaan dit?
Well, the Good Morning Angels of a well-known radio station visited Rustenburg last week to alleviate the plight of a single mother and her 2 boys. Now, if you would like to know more about this, go to page 8 of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald. But before you go to page 8, you can catch a glimpse of what was happening there on the front page of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald.
Die sportblaaie bars uit hul nate. Ek sien 'n Rustenburger is besig om 'n 7-speler naam te maak.
Yes, his name is John Stale from Rustenburg. He was included in the junior Barbarians team that competed in a tournament in Portugal. Stale was one of the stars of the team. You can read more about his story on the back page of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald, which is page 16.
Van bladsy 16 gepraat. Ek sien daar is 'n groep van rustiese atlete ook op die bladsy. Wie is hulle?
Well, they are the under-19 girls relay team of Rustenburg High School. They were a big hit in the Northwest University Super 16 athletics meeting. Get the full story, like we said, on page 16 of this week's edition of the Rustenburg Herald.
Ons is nou weer aan die einde van ons nuusbulletin. Dit was soos altyd lekker om saam met julle te kuier. Van my Unita laat te gaan. Totsiens tot volgende week.
Well, and from myself, Jabulani Sinyazo, we say goodbye for now and have a great week ahead. And we hope that you're going to join us next week in the news bulletin. But stick around. There's a video that we're going to be publishing on the bulletin about the issue of the CFO at the Rustenburg local municipality. So stick around and be amazed.